What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. All right, let me tell you guys something. Like every single human being born on the face of the planet, I was born knowing who Batman is, right? It wasn't until Comics Explained took off and I started getting into his character with Scott Snyder's Batman that I was like, okay, so Batman's really cool the way Snyder writes him. Like, I love Snyder's run. So I started going through and looking at old Batman stories. Not to sound arrogant, but I'd like to believe I know almost everything there is to know about Batman. Like, I've read the old Dennis O'Neil, Neil Adams run. I read The Dark Knight Returns. I've read Batman Year One. I've read Tales of the Dark Knight. I've read all kinds of Batman stories. The whole of Scott Snyder's New 52 run and Batman Eternal. Let me tell you something, man. Batman Cold Days by Tom King is some of the best Batman writing I've ever heard of. Jesus, it's good, man. Like, I even tweeted out to him, I was like, Tom King, this is some of the best Batman writing I ever heard of in my life. That's just all there is to it. Okay, so this comes as the aftermath to Catwoman leaving Batman, because Tom King almost kind of takes like the aftermath to the death of Jason Todd. For those of you guys who don't know, when Jason Todd died, following the events of Death in the Family, like, DC was working towards bringing in like Tim Drake, bringing in like a new Robin. And so the idea was that Batman had become like super dark and like ridiculously almost uncontrollable, just kind of maniacal in terms of like how he would function and how brutal he would be. And this led to Tim Drake, who witnessed the whole thing, who was witnessing like how dark Batman was becoming. Tim Drake goes to Dick Grayson and says, hey, you have to go back to being Robin. Tim Drake says, no, I'm Nightwing now. He says, but you should be Robin instead, because Tim Drake had figured out the identities of Bruce Wayne and Batman, and Tim Drake's stance was Batman needs a Robin because he's almost lost his mind. He's just so vicious at this point. Tom King kind of takes that and then like reworks it in a beautiful way, and it's incredible. There's amazing lines here. So this picks up with Batman getting jury duty, right? Like Batman basically arrives at like Gotham Courthouse because he's there for jury duty. But this is kind of interspliced in with moments where like he's attacking Victor Freeze, and we don't really know why yet. And it's kind of cool because Tom King plays on that. He's like, well, it's your run-of-the-mill thing. You know, it's Batman fighting Victor Freeze. It's what happens. But it's also something that's kind of interesting too, because the way that Tom King writes this, it's like Bruce Wayne's never served on jury duty. So it's kind of like a big to-do. And in reality, it actually makes sense that like somewhere along the line, Bruce Wayne would get jury duty. The idea here is that, you know, at least as far as the facts are given to the potential jurors, because at this point right now, it's more or less just like figuring out, for those of you guys who don't know how jury selection works, what'll happen is the prosecution and the defense will basically go through and start asking a series of questions, at least for high profile jury selection. They'll start asking a series of questions and they'll analyze the responses of the jurors to basically find jurors that will give them the best verdict possible. And it's a balancing act, right? Like the prosecution wants jurors that will find the party guilty, and the defense wants jurors that will find the person innocent. So you kind of have to like go through this balancing act, and they want jurors that they can persuade either way. And it's interesting because Bruce Wayne kind of puts off this really impartial perception of just like, yeah, like I'm here, but I don't really want to be here. But it's kind of cool because you have the defense and the prosecution who are analyzing, you know, how they react and what they say, and they say, okay, defense does not object to juror number 4, prosecution does not object to juror number 4, Bruce Wayne's selected. Now what this means is that he's sequestered, basically meaning they'll be kept in isolation. They'll be put to a hotel somewhere. It'll be a very secure hotel. No one will know that they're there. I mean, they may even be given like false names in order to keep their identities hidden. That was a big to-do during like the O.J. Simpson case and things like that. The jury was sequestered so they couldn't be accessed and couldn't be, you know, coerced or bribed into finding O.J. Simpson guilty or not guilty or what have you. But when Bruce Wayne gets in here and he sits down and just sort of starts thinking, the one big question we have here is if he's sequestered for the next few days, meaning he cannot leave the hotel and he cannot be Batman, who's going to be Batman in his stead? And right off the bat, Tom King answers the question and says Dick Grayson. And it's beautiful because as soon as this happened, it means, okay, so like Batman's not going to be the forefront of the story. So the prosecution sits down, you know, everybody makes their case. Prosecution sits down and says, you've heard, you know, everything that's being, the defense sits down, you know, the prosecution presents their case and they say, hey, look, here's what happened, so on and so forth. And Tom King kind of skips over it, right? He treats it like an episode of like Law and Order, you know, where you don't see everything that goes on, you just get the highlights of the case. And so the defense sits down and says, here's where we stand right now. You've heard what the prosecution presented. 3 women were killed. And these 3 women were killed by means that were initially unknown to the Gotham City Police Department. That it was just kind of like, okay, they died of natural causes of blood clots, but then now Batman comes along and Batman starts poking around and does what Batman does and figures out that basically the cause of death was brought on by like cold. that basically these blood clots were created by cold. And so in response, it seems as though somehow Batman figured out what the Gotham City Police Department couldn't figure out. Now, that's throwing in doubt. Initially, there was no evidence to show that Victor Fries had killed these women. And so now, then suddenly Batman comes along and there is evidence. So is it true or is it not true? And so then, of course, they put Commissioner Gordon on the stand. And Commissioner Gordon, it kind of goes to that hardcore examination where it's yes or no answers. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, in the legal profession, it's a way to basically keep the jury from being confused and to only stick to the facts. Now, sometimes what'll happen is lawyers will ask a question in such a way to where they kind of lean towards one direction. And in this instance, it's basically the defense lawyer saying, well, give me the rundown here. So initially, you guys found no evidence that Victor Fries had killed these girls, right? The evidence you found said that there were blood clots. Yes or no? The answer is yes. Okay, at this point, Batman comes in and Batman starts examining the body. Yes or no? Yes. Is Batman licensed to perform autopsies for the city of Gotham? And then that's when Commissioner Gordon starts to kind of say, hey, but look, man, it's not so black and white. And it isn't black and white. But the fact is the lawyer's looking for yes or no answers. That's the way the legal profession works. And so the answer is definitively no. Batman is not licensed to conduct autopsies for the city of Gotham. That throws the evidence that Batman brought into question. If a person shows up to you and tells you they're a cop, but they're not, does it mean they're a cop? And so it's really a cool little scenario here. Now, of course, at this point, you have the jurors who are really kind of having their own individual discussion. They're having lunch. They're kind of talking about things, but they're not taking the case seriously. And right off the bat, Bruce Wayne just sort of begins to kind of snap. Of course, he excuses himself, goes to the bathroom, and then freaks out because what Bruce Wayne has realized in the blink of an eye in the time they've been having lunch is that Victor Fries will be found guilty. Because in this scenario, they see Batman as beyond reproach. And that's something that he really focuses on here. Now, of course, at that point, we go to Detective Bullock, right? Bullock, of course, Lieutenant Bullock is kind of hey, look, the defense lawyer asks, the body was dropped off at Gotham Police Station. Yes. Okay. Do you know who put it there? Well, there was no sign there was no signature from Batman saying that he put it there, but the guy had a batarang in the side of his head. We knew who it was that did it. And so then we go into probably the most damning piece of evidence here when Victor Fries gets up on the stand and then basically talks about how he made a confession. But he says, I did this because I was so terrified for my life, because he just kept hitting me over and over and over again, and I didn't know what else to do. And so I just did what he wanted. And so then you go into you go into the jury section, where they're literally okay, we're basically trying to figure out if he's going to be guilty or not. And you have all these jurors who are just well, I mean, it's Batman. Batman saved Gotham City. He saved me. He fights the bad guys. He fights a good fight. He's Batman. So of course, Victor Fries was guilty. He's a bad guy. And so what ends up happening is when the question's asked, okay, does everybody find Victor Fries guilty? Everybody raises their hand except for Bruce Wayne. And Bruce Wayne says, I don't think he's guilty. And it's just damn. So that's when the plot thickens. And so from there, you start getting into these super incredible explanations, these really, really amazing scenarios where Batman starts talking with these various people. And the jury, the various jurors are getting up and they're saying things hey, look, he's Victor Fries. The guy's a well-known criminal. Batman's fought him on a multitude of occasions. The guy he does this thing over and over and over again. It's the thing he always does. He's just a bad guy. Of course he was guilty. Why would Batman be tracking him down? And the response of Bruce Wayne is, that's not reason enough. That's not enough evidence here. Just because Batman was chasing a guy does not mean that guy's guilty. There's a kind of pattern that's going on with this jury. And so Bruce Wayne sits down and says, look, all I ask is an hour or two. That's all I ask. When this hour or two is done, if I haven't persuaded you, I'll find him guilty. But listen to what I have to say. Listen to this explanation that I offer here. And so it's kind of cool because as he goes through and starts talking to them, one of the things he says, let's sit down and let's start looking at this evidence, right? So Commissioner Gordon and the Gotham City Police Department, the coroner, which by his own admission, Commissioner Gordon said was one of the best coroners, sat down and found no evidence that there was any indication these girls had died by the actions of Mr. Fries, which is to say, cold was not used to induce these blood clots. And so between the time the coroner initially did his autopsy and the time Batman showed up, it's possible someone went in there. There's no evidence here to show that no one was in there. And so if there's no evidence to show no one was in there, then that means you can believe someone was in there because there's no evidence to show either way. So each possibility is entirely possible. And so then from there, the question that Bruce Wayne asks is, if Commissioner Gordon and the coroners didn't find anything and then Batman did, then why? Why was that the case? And one of the jurors responds, it's because he's Batman. And Bruce Wayne's response is, yeah, okay, that's not an argument here. This is so cool. It's Bruce Wayne putting himself on trial, right? Because looking at all these jurors, Bruce Wayne makes this amazing point and he says, so what you're telling me here is that Commissioner Gordon and the coroner found no evidence that Victor Fries was involved in this. Batman Batman did, and you're gonna convict on that because Batman's just better. That's all the evidence you need? Well, in that case, like, everyone that Batman tracks down is guilty. And it's just like, it's like you're finding somebody guilty based explicitly on the fact that Batman says he is. And that's what's so awesome about that. Because then he in turn says, okay, people ask the question, well then, why was he wearing his suit? Like why was he wearing the whole Victor Freeze costume, even though he was explicitly told not to? He was on house arrest, and part of his probation was that he could not access his gun or his suit. And someone had told him, by his own admission, someone had told Victor Freeze, Batman's coming for you. Why would he in turn completely get dressed up? And then Bruce goes on like this really cool explanation. He says, for years and years and years and years, Victor Freeze and Batman have fought. Every single time Victor Freeze did something bad, Batman would basically come flying in, guns blazing, and just beat the hell out of Victor Freeze. No questions would be asked until the end when the beating was taken. And so if you're Victor Freeze and someone tells you Batman's coming for you, what in the hell else are you gonna do besides get your gun and get your suit? You're gonna panic and you're gonna prep yourself for battle, because all you've known in your encounters with Batman is that he would beat the crap out of you. And it's so cool. And so at that point, he goes into the confession, which is really the most damning piece of evidence, that Victor Freeze sat down and he made a confession to Batman. I'm the one who did it. I killed these women, so on and so forth. And so from there, like, one woman, Missy, basically speaks up and says, well, I know where you're gonna go. It's, oh man, he was just so victimized, and he was, it was just, sad little tears and everything. And Batman kind of Bruce Wayne counters and says, no, it's not necessarily like that. And then he goes on a story about himself. And that's what's so cool here. He talks about his life as a child. And he says that when he was a kid, when his parents died, that all he knew at that moment in time was just fear. And he would have given anything to make that stop. Referring to Batman indirectly, of course, not saying like, I am Batman, guys. It's just kind of like, I've had times in my life when I've had the highest highs and I've had the lowest lows. But when I'm at my lowest, I'll do anything to make that go away. I'll do anything to bring myself back up to a happier place. If Victor Freeze is anything like that, if he's anything like a human being, he's the exact same way. And so in that moment when Batman is pummeling the hell out of him, he'll say whatever he needs to say in order to make it stop. Now, the fact that this is included in here is not an accident. Tom King, if you ever see this video, I apologize if I'm stepping on toes, but Tom King used to be a guy who worked in the CIA. And the idea is one of the big things, I don't know how many of you guys remember back, but like post 9/11, in the later years of the Bush administration, one of the things that people began to learn about was extraordinary rendition. Taking people who were suspected to be terrorists, flying them overseas to places where torture could be practiced, and then torturing them, and then getting information out of them. And on one side, you had people who said, no, that's perfectly okay. And then on the other side of the field, you had people who said, but torture doesn't work though. People will do whatever they'll say whatever they need to say to make the torture stop. The counter argument to that is, yeah, but if they're lying, we'll just torture them again, and we'll keep doing that until they tell the truth. There's this kind of back and forth, but that's why it's thrown in here. It's not an accident. And so in turn, you have Bruce Wayne who speaks to Missy directly and says, hey, I noticed you have a cross, and she says, yeah, I mean, I have a cross, I believe in God, I have faith, I have all these things. Do you believe in God? And Batman's response is, I used to. Bruce Wayne says, I used to believe in God. My father, Thomas Wayne, he believed in God. He believed in like the hallowed spirit and the immortal soul and God and the Trinity and the whole 9 yards. But then he says, after the death of my father, I stopped believing. I stopped believing that God was real, because where was God when my mother and father died? And that's so cool. That's so cool to give us like this introspection of Bruce Wayne, why he doesn't believe in God. Everyone who's ever been in like a terrible situation, who's lost someone close to them and their faith is questioned, it always comes down to that question. Well, where the hell was God when my parents died? Where was God when my children died? What has God done for like the last 2,000 years besides sit on high and judge people? It's all these really great questions that kind of come in, and Tom King throws them in there and says, Bruce Wayne has asked them all. And so in turn, he kind of tells this story about himself and says, in my lack of belief in God, I turned to something else. I knew there had to be something else out there to believe in, something that was tangible. And what he's doing here without telling them is telling them the journey on how he became Batman. And he kind of goes on and he says, like, we're all here because like we're citizens of this city. We're all here because we're citizens of Gotham. And if we're citizens of Gotham, we know what Gotham's about. We know that Gotham sucks. We know that Gotham can be a crappy place, that Gotham is home to just some of the worst scum in the world. But there he is, the man in the cape, saving us all, fighting the bad guys, defeating the villains. He's everything that we could hope him to be. What he does is he kind of paints this picture and he says, or at least the question is asked, do you believe Batman's God? At least the question is asked to Bruce Wayne. From Missy, she says, Batman makes mistakes, but you believe Batman might be God? And his response is actually pretty ironic. He says, I thought he was a god. Like, I believed he was a god at some point in time. And then he asks the question, how many of you are here because of Batman? And of course they all raise their hands. They're like, yeah, we've been saved by Batman at some point in time. And he says, that's the problem. That's the problem here. If you truly believe, like if you believe that Mr. Freeze is innocent, then that means that you have to believe that Batman screwed up. And if you believe that Batman screwed up, then suddenly Batman's not God anymore. Then Batman's not infallible. As far as you're concerned, Batman, God is above us and he wears a cape. And when I was reading through this and I saw that, I was just like, God in heaven, man, this guy has a way with words. It's funny because he says, like, you have to believe that Batman's God. You are here because Batman saved you. And you feel like maybe you owe something, or because of the greatness of Batman, that he's an infallible person. The way that you would expect God to save you, Batman saved you instead. And therefore, Batman takes the place of God in your lives. He's the world's greatest detective. He's a guy that never screwed up. He's just that good. We trust that Batman will always make the right decision. And if he makes a wrong decision, then it means that he erred. It means we can't necessarily trust him anymore. And it's so cool because he calls people's perception of Batman into question. It says, it's like the story of Job. And it's so cool that he brings up, he says, it's like the story of Job, that Job has his whole life ripped apart by God in a gamble between God and the devil. And when Job questions and says, why are you doing this to me? God's response is, I'm the man who made like the mountains and miracles. Who are you to question me? That's how people perceive Batman. The people in Gotham City, they look at him and they say, he's up. I mean, look at him. He's up there. We worship at the altar of Batman in the form of praising his greatness, and never calling him into question. But the response is, he's a man just like everybody else. He screws up and he makes mistakes and he does dumb things. He's not some infallible being. He's just a man. Nothing more than that. And so it's crazy here because then he sort of begins to kind of move in this direction of talking about the life that he had with Selina Kyle. What he tells us is that for the longest time in his life, all he's ever really known is misery and sadness, that he lost the greatest thing he ever had in the form of his parents, and that he turned to Batman in order to try to find happiness, but never found it. All he found was violence, and all he found was more violence. And that was it. Violence, sadness, and loss. And then when he'd almost given up, he found happiness. He found happiness in the form of Selina Kyle. The one thing he never thought he would ever be able to find. He found happiness and he found love. And then it was yanked away from him. She took off and he was right back where he was before. It's Bruce Wayne saying, like, I am at the lowest point of my life right now. I am as low as my life has been since the death of my parents. It's almost Batman, like Bruce Wayne, pleading with himself and then pleading with them to understand the nature of Batman, that he screws up, that he makes mistakes, that he's not an infallible being. And so if they believe that Batman is truly a man, if they believe that Batman is truly a guy, that he's not some god up there listening, that they have to accept that he screws up. And if they have to accept that he screws up, then they have to remove Batman from the equation of all the evidence here at the courtroom, and they have to say, look at the facts for what they are. Nothing here supports that Victor Freeze killed these girls. And so you have to find him not guilty. And making this compelling argument and one of the greatest Batman stories ever told, in turn, the jury finds him not guilty. Now, it doesn't mean that Batman's walking away. It doesn't mean he's just letting him go. It's just like, we're going to go on the trail of figuring out who's actually at large here. Not only that, King throws in a couple things. What would a Batman story be without a couple of funny moments? What we end up finding out here is that Bruce Wayne never really believed that Victor Freeze was guilty, that he had pummeled the hell out of him, he'd beat the hell out of him, and thrown him on the doorstep of the Gotham City Police Department because he snapped, because he lost control of himself. And in losing control, all he wanted to do was just make Victor Freeze suffer, because Victor Freeze happened to be the one who was there. And so in that moment, because of the fact that he knew he screwed up, he bribed his way onto the jury. He bribed his way into jury duty in order to convince the jurors not to find Victor Freeze guilty and have him executed, because his life was on the line. And so in turn, he basically contacts Alfred and says, Alfred, I'm totally lost. After losing Selina Kyle, I'm lost. I have to regain my bearings. I have to regain my roots. And he goes back to the old school costume, goes back to the OG costume that all of us know and love. Batman's kind of starting over again and trying to refine himself. What this means, it's anybody's guess, but I am sure as hell excited to find out. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.